This little girl wanted to belong. She wanted to be a part of this American culture because she knew she had to live there. And every day I would go to school and the kids were not nice to me because I was the only Hispanic in the school. And they would make fun of me. They'd call me a spick. I didn't have friends. I was even afraid to raise my hand until the teacher had to go to the bathroom in the middle of the class because I didn't even know how to say that.
Go out there together. We begin to share.
Good to see you back here on the Pulse. I'm Patricia Falco Beccalli, your host, and today we are going to have Mary Quintana on the show. Now, she wrote a magnificent book. It's called Last Flight from Havana, a memoir of Cuba, family, and faith. And this is one of those books, memoirs, true stories, putting a life into perspective, a trajectory into a long trajectory in a very short book, I have to say, which personally speaking touched me very much. Before speaking to Mary, let me quickly update you on her. She had a fantastic 30-year-long corporate career in the US, working for companies such as PepsiCo, for example, IBM or Tenet. Had a huge career, many accolades and awards, and her life, your life, Mary, is spectacular. Last Flight from Havana is basically your memoir about your parents having to flee from Cuba due to the communist regime settling in, and the future your father thought would be much better in the US for himself and the family. Starting over is the theme of the book. Tell us a little bit about what really triggered that now was the right time for you to write down your memories about your family history in this book.
Thank you, Patricia. And first of all, thank you so much for hosting this. And thank you for having me on this show. I have truly been looking forward to this. And I will tell you that it's probably the most courageous and most difficult thing that I've ever done is to write this book. And I think it's because it draws out so much emotion in me. I have been thinking about writing this book for over 10 years, believe it or not. I mean, there was a time when I was even at PepsiCo, and I was thinking to myself, I've had all of these events happen to me. And sometimes they're difficult, very difficult, a lot of adversity. And I went through a lot of different hard times. And I thought, I'm going through this because I need to write about it. There's something that has happened in my life that I hope I can help others. And so I started writing, and I would be writing on the airplanes. Airplanes are always great times to write. And then I started to collect notebooks and more notebooks. And I'm thinking, what am I going to do with all of this? And one day, about 5 years ago, I sat down, I said, I need to do this. And when I left Tenet, which was 2 years ago, I decided this was time. And then it was another year and a half of a difficult time of taking chapters out of the book. Because as you said, it's a small book, but I could have written many, many more things. And I started thinking, the reader's not going to want to know all this detail. But if they're interested in a specific area of my life, I'd love to talk about it. So I started to take things out. And again, it's still, to me, and as you said, I spent 30 years in corporate America. I've done a lot of difficult projects in the business world. This was actually the most courageous thing that I have ever done, is to actually write my story and then put it out there for everyone to read.
Writing your own story, I think, is always a little bit of an act of balance, because on one hand, one wants to really, as you say, maybe share something other people can learn from, but you don't want it to be like a venting kind of, valve of just getting rid of whatever there might be as your history, a potential baggage. Let's backtrack a little bit, and let me quickly take, I think one of the most massive quotes is actually in the preface, starting over, which says, "Fear, shock, uncertainty, doubt. Those were the early themes in my young life. Time and again, I had to start over, whether in a new country, new school, new job, or new relationship." Let's go back. Let's go and start to introduce our community a little bit to who Mary was as a 4-year-old all of a sudden being ripped out of what seemed to have been a very light, beautiful, ever family enclosing childhood.
Yes, a beautiful family, large extended family. My grandfather was a farmer. He was the third largest rice farmer in Cuba. And we lived 2 hours outside of Havana in a beautiful community where he was the patriarch. He would take care of his family. He bought a barber shop for his brother, a grocery store for his sisters. And so we lived very happily until communism came in the late 1950s. And as a small child in the early 60s, I started hearing gunshots on the street, and everything changed overnight. And I hear it from my mother's voice, which I'm so fortunate she's still alive. She'll be 96 in June. And she tells me these stories, and I'm so fortunate to have her. In fact, her voice was the first chapter of my book because those times were so scary. I got very, very scared. And I would hide under the bed. I was afraid of strangers. There were certain things happening to me. And my mom even took me to a psychiatrist to say, what is wrong with her? She cries all the time. And he said it was situational stress and a crisis. My father was a very smart man. He was very wise. He worked sometimes in the United States for the sugar industry. So he was back and forth. And after the Bay of Pigs, which he was managing a sugar refinery right at the edge of the Bay of Pigs, and when he saw that the country was collapsing, he made plans. And he spoke to a company in the United States in Louisiana. They offered him an opportunity to come for about 3 months. He came, and then he asked for my mother, my brother, and I to come visit. And, some people in Cuba, some of our family thought we were going on vacation. Others knew we were planning to leave. And I'll tell you, that day, and I talk about it in one of the chapters of the book, where we went to the Havana airport after we had said goodbye to all of our family, and it was chaos. I mean, I can remember, I do remember my mom like crying because they were taking things away from her. And we were only allowed to take 40 pounds of clothing with us. We boarded the Delta flight, which was the last commercial flight to shut down Havana airport. And all of the Delta employees boarded the plane with us. And so that is the name of the book, Last Flight from Havana, because it truly was the last flight, the last commercial flight to shut down all of Havana commercial planes. Landed in New Orleans on Thanksgiving Day. Of course, we didn't know what Thanksgiving was. And then, we were faced with the fact that my father only had that job for 3 months and he was out of work. And so we went to a housing project, and that's where Catholic Charities helped us. And he was looking for work. I mean, we didn't speak the language. We were sad, and I think over time I've even realized I saw my parents grieving, and I, as the oldest, felt like I needed to take on the responsibility of helping them. And all through my life, I've always had this feeling like I need to help them. They've been through so much. I've got to be the one to help them. And so my father did find some work in a small town of Reserve, Louisiana, small town between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. In fact, our house was on the Mississippi River, and we settled there and we were the first Hispanic family. So it was almost like you're getting dropped in from another planet, because no one there really understood what had happened in Cuba. We had just been torn from our families and our country, and we're landing in this place where they were like, so what is Cuba? Who is Castro? So it was very isolating and very, very difficult for my family those first few years.
The beginning of let's say, the Hispanic motion into the US, that really happened more or less after that. Fidel Castro introduced communism and really clamped down on Cuba. 1961, you landed. And I think in the 60s, you wrote there were about only 3.5% of Latinos in the States. So you were really Ausländer, as they said, but not only Ausländer instead of, from another country, but another culture entirely, and landing in the US, not knowing the language, the culture, or anything, and having also your dad not knowing whether he's going to continue with a job is certainly something that is, terribly threatening to a child. I mean, terribly threatening, because security is something that we look for in our parents and our families. And if you see that your parents are struggling, as a child, you're not supposed to look after your parents. It's your parents, you know, needing to look after you. And I wonder, you know, when I was reading your story, I had this theme of trauma. You know, there was Raul. He was a little bit. He's smaller than you, right? He was
Right,
a little bit
right.
smaller.
18 months younger, yes.
18 months younger. And you had, like I wrote down, you had the trauma of being a refugee. You had the trauma to go to a new school, being the odd kid out. And we'll talk about that, because I think that profoundly shaped also who you became, potentially. You had the trauma of the loss of your family in Cuba, but then later on, of course, the impact of your father, then impact for losing your father, and then your own private life with your own children and your loss. So your life, instead, you know, has starting over definitely as a theme, but trauma seems to be a big part of it. To what extent would you say that is A, true, and B, has really guided you in a way to...
Oh, it speaks to my heart. Thank you so much for bringing that up. It is so true. And I'll tell you that the more I speak about this book, it has actually been really healing for me, because it was a very traumatic experience for that little girl to hear the gunshots, to see my grandfather being taken away in the middle of the night, and to have to hide under my bed. And it got to the point where my mom said any new person that would come into the house that I didn't know, I would run under the bed. And so I wrote about it even in this book. And I did not even acknowledge some of the emotions that actually were kind of tangled up in that. And it started the trauma, and it started that little girl to understand that you're going to have to pick up those pieces, and you're going to have to move on, and you're going to have to figure it out yourself, because there's no one else to help you. And I think that's the other part. And you're talking about that. As a little girl, you think your parents are going to take care of you, and they're going to be the ones to lead you. And I very quickly knew that I could not count on them. And as much as I love them, and they've provided such amazing unconditional love, I had to step up, and I had to be the one to watch out for myself, but also to watch out for them. And I think that was the other thing that's come out of me even speaking about this book, is that I carry that huge accountability, almost to make up for what they lost. And I thought, you know, why should I carry? Why did my brother carry some of this? But he didn't. And I think it was just, I was older, and maybe I just, you know, I was more emotionally attached to these things and saw this from a different perspective. But I have been the one to carry this, to say, how can I make it better for them? And it's so interesting, because you're right. It happens that I have had many more different traumas in my life, and we can talk about them as we go forward. But just that whole new school experience, that whole situation of, you know, even moving, as I said, you know, in my career, where, okay, I started to be a clinical social worker, and then all of a sudden I moved on to work for a systems engineer at IBM. I mean, how do you do that? How do you even think about doing that? But the loss that I've then had throughout my life. And so I have learned, and I think it just molded me to be the person that I am, that says, no one's going to be there to really take care of me. I'm going to figure it out, and then I am going to be responsible for others. And that has been who I am. I mean, that's exactly right. You really touched on something really deep for me.
Yeah, it's I can relate to that in a big way, and this is all about you and your book. But let me just say why I can relate, and also to our listeners and viewers. My parents also refugees, also from the communist system, Hungarians, fleeing. I was born in Vienna on the way, and then grew up in Germany. Also, my parents arriving without knowing the language, without having a penny. I think 20 Deutschmark my dad had, and a baby, no job. I mean, like, literally, and they arrived, they had to start from scratch. And I also, my mom, she said, you know, you were such a good baby. you were always the sunshine and positive, and you were self-sufficient, and I always felt that you wanted to care for us, and you somehow knew that we couldn't deal with a bad child,
Oh,
somebody that was a
wow.
burden. And I feel and share so much with you that I looked at my parents and I knew I could not turn to them for guidance, for love, yes, for being my parents, yes, but everything else, no.
Right.
And they almost had this communist DNA already in them, going
Yes.
into high street capitalism, and they never got it. And I grew up in capitalism,
Yes.
so it was, but this feeling of not being able to rely on those people that give you security. That's a trauma of mine, is security. If I
Yep.
don't do
Yep.
it, I
Yep.
don't rely, right?
Yes, no, I can so relate to that. You're absolutely right. And everything. I mean, I can remember, just, when they were thinking of buying a house, which by the way, they had their bags packed, thinking they were going back for almost 20 years. They were ready to go back. And it wasn't until later, I think I had finished college, that they decided it was time. They were going to have to stay. They were going to buy a house. And even then, I had to help them with everything, their finances, and so I feel that, and I love that I can talk about it, because I've talked about my life throughout the years. When I was in corporate America, I was always doing speeches and this and that, but I've never really gone deep into these areas, and I think they're so healing, and I think we as immigrants have that in common. And I'll say, this book has been an interesting journey for me, because my daughter actually put it out on LinkedIn, and she works in the tech world. And many of these tech executives that are males that come from India and, Jordan, different countries, Lebanon, they have read the book and they've reached out to her and said, this book is my book. Your mother is writing my immigrant story. I went through this, even to the point where there was a very high level executive who was crying to her because it brought tears of emotions that he had never really touched on himself. That my book was bringing those, to his mind and to his memory. And even one gentleman wanted me to have a conference call with him. He wanted to discuss it because he was so moved. And he said, I don't know why I've never been able to talk about this. So I don't know, it's like giving people permission to go back and to say, yes, we did it and it's great and we move forward and we're immigrants, but guess what? There was a lot there. There was a lot to unpack. And we as human beings, we went through trauma, and it actually helps us to talk about it. And I think it's kind of a healing process for us.
I totally find, when he said your book is my book, I felt that on so many levels. And there's one particular story I think I'd love you to tell us a little bit about it, about the white dress, and the reason why I think the white dress experience was so pivotal, would have been also pivotal for me, is one thing that I felt you did was you totally embraced the new world. Okay, it was a shock. You went to the US, but you wanted to be American, and everything was gone. Whereas you had parents that held on to it, and everything that was American, despite being immigrants in America, they would not necessarily want to embrace because they wanted to go back. But that was your life now. So this kind of, I would say, tension domestically between parents and their dreams and nostalgia going back. You at home, having arrived, embracing, and actually wanting to be more American than the Americans, that is tension in itself. And then that white dress experience, talk us through this one, because
Oh, yes,
that made
I
me
love
cry.
it.
That made me cry.
It still makes me cry when I talk about it. So I'm so happy you're bringing this topic up, because when I wrote the book is about that tension. I mean, there's many parts about that book. And I was actually at first scared to write that because I didn't want to hurt their feelings even. You still think about that, like I'm still responsible for them. And I wanted it to be a legacy, but not that the tension was bad, but make the tension a part of the journey. And And I think I've done that because my brothers have even related to it and everyone's related to it. And that's the fact. It's like this little girl wanted to belong. She wanted to be a part of this American culture because she knew she had to live there. And every day I would go to school and the kids were not nice to me because I was the only Hispanic in the school. And they would make fun of me. They'd call me a spick. I didn't have friends. I was even afraid to raise my hand until the teacher had to go to the bathroom in the middle of the class because I didn't even know how to say that. So there was so much tension and pride in me. I wanted to belong. And so my teacher gave instructions to the class for picture day. And I thought, picture day, we're all going to look the same. We're going to be in this big picture, it'll be a group picture. And I was so excited. I understood we had to wear all white. And I went home and I told my mom, I said, I have to find an all white dress or skirt, with a blouse, because that's what the teacher has instructed us. And she said, you don't have one. You're not going to be able to have one. And I was crying, and she knew that I was very upset at school because I didn't have any friends yet. And so she went out, and with the little money that we had, my mother taught herself to sew the minute we landed in America. She was not a seamstress before, but she sewed that white skirt and a white blouse. We were able to find some white shoes and white socks. And I thought, this is going to be the day that I'm going to fit in. And I could see myself in the picture with all the other children. And so my father was driving me to school, and I'll never forget, and it still does bring me to tears, when I looked out into the playground and saw the children playing they were dressed with all the colors of the rainbow. And I remember looking for the white, like, who's wearing white? And no one was wearing white. And then I understood to myself that I had gotten the instructions wrong. And so when my father pulled up to the door, I can remember looking at him and saying, Daddy, please take me home, because I'm going to be sick. I don't want to be here. It's going to be a really hard day. I can't do it. And to this day, I think about this too. My dad had the courage to let me go. And even now it makes me want to cry, because I know it was hard for him to let me go, because he also suffered through me. When he would see me sad, he would be sad. My dad was such an amazing man. But he had the courage to say, no, you must go in, because this is a hard day. You've been through hard days before, and you'll get through this just like you've gotten through your other days. And I took a deep breath, and I got out of the car and went into school that day and had a very difficult day. I mean, they definitely called me names. They pointed at me. I was, put aside. The teacher, I think, was even upset. And then later, obviously, she understood that I didn't have any way of knowing. And so, I go back to that day. That day to me was a defining moment. And I hid that moment for a long time, Patricia. It's interesting. As I, went through my career and I became, an executive, and there was a woman who is an author who wanted to write about top executives across the retail sector. And she came to me and she said, I want to write about you. Tell me your story. And out came the white dress day. I remember this. I was at PepsiCo. And I said, well, I can tell you about the story, but don't write it down. Don't write it down, because it's too emotional. And she says, Marie, you don't understand. This is your day. And through the healing of that and through the working through that, I have come to know that was my defining moment. And I go back to that. And I've used it so many times on panels and moderators and when I've spoken to women, because we all have a defining moment in our lives. And it's sometimes when you're a child, and you can then gather so much strength from knowing the difficult moment and the tears, that emotions that still come up when I talk about it. But it has defined my life going forward.
When you came home that day, your dad gave you courage in the car, saying, hey, listen, you've gone through some tough times before. You are going to make it, giving you faith. But you could see he was suffering. It wasn't easy for him. And you would have just wanted to leave and just kind of die in that moment and not be there. When you came home, how were you received? How did you feel? How did your dad greet you?
Well, I was so happy the day was over. And he was so proud that I went through it. I mean, just pure love, pure love. I mean, it actually, I think, brought our family, those moments unite you even more because we know we have each other and you know that you can find shelter within your family, shelter within the closeness. And, we're a very faithful family. And, it's always like God is going to be with you. And there's always a reminder, like, no matter what you went through today, my mother has always been so good about that. You're never alone. He's always with you. So when you go through the fire, when you go through these difficult times, God's going to also be there with you. And constantly talking about that and reminding of that. So, in many ways it was healing to me. The next day I was going to have to go back and deal with it again.
Exactly. It's not over with that one day. That's the point, yeah.
Right. Yeah. But it was like that sheltering feeling, like, when I was a little girl and I was able to go under the bed and find that quiet space. My family's always been that refuge for me. And that's what they were that day.
Your father. I mean, on one hand, he made you have this pivotal moment. Two things come to my mind. When you say this was really defining, I wonder what part of your character from that pain really had the biggest gain, the biggest growth. You don't go through it, but you grow through it, ideally. What would you say in hindsight was that pivotal, maybe emotional or even characterial change or shift that this experience moved in you?
A couple of things. Number one is fear. Is things that are really fearful, which sometimes to me, I get this enormous offer for a huge job, right? And I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm not even qualified to take that role, right? And to know that you can take that risk to walk through something and that you will figure it out once you're there. It's, I go back to looking at all the different things that have happened to me, to think that, sure, I can do that. I can, like I said before, I can have a master's in clinical social work, take on a job that requires me to be a systems engineer in IBM and figure it out while I'm there. And so that was fearful. All these new people that are systems engineers looking at me saying, you don't fit in, right? Who are you? And when you have to say, like, what is your degree in? Because there'd be like computer science. It's like, I have a master's in clinical social work. It's like, what? So, the idea of not fitting in and being able to walk through those doors and stay in yourself and like I said, be still, know I am God. And to know that you will figure it out. And it may not be today, it may not be tomorrow, because sometimes it takes longer but you will do it. You will get to that road where you're feeling like, okay, I've done it. What's next? What do I do next?
Yeah, feeling comfortable in the uncomfortable moments. I think that is something that these kind of moments really define. I don't want to say, you become a stoic, but you do become okay with not being okay for a while in a moment or feeling overwhelmed, and you just figure it out. As you said, I love the way you said it, figuring it out. Your father, I would like to talk to you about your dad. He seems to have been an incredibly positive person. He basically unplugged you, luckily, in time from Cuba. He established a whole new reality and whole new life, and a good life, it seems, because look what happened, what became of you and also your family in general. But at the same time, he was never, it doesn't seem that your parents ever really arrived. And then with the arrival of your grandparents, even less so. They were always on this is just provisional moment.
Mm-hmm.
What was he like, really?
Bigger than life, bigger than life. My dad came from a family of 14 brothers and sisters, and he was the youngest one. And he was raised by his brothers and sisters, and they lived in a farm outside of Havana. My dad was the only one in the family to attend college. And he went on to be a sugar chemist. It was sugarcane was king, Julio Lobo. He worked in the sugar industry. And he loved life. And I say that in my book, and life loved him. My dad was, in so many ways, a very smart man, but he was also very wise. very, very wise. And he was very emotional. I mean, he just took care of everyone. He took care of his brothers and sisters. And, he was, he saw into the future. And so obviously, giving us the opportunity to be able to come to the new country. But whenever there was a problem at work or wherever, I was working on whatever project, he was the first person I called. I mean, my dad was always able to figure things out for me. And the other thing is that looking back, every award that I ever received, Patricia, the first thing I did was, this is a very nice award. Thank you very much. Let me call my dad. Let me call my dad because this isn't for me. This is for him. And so he loved his country more than anything. My dad would be listening to the World Series or a baseball game, and when he heard the national anthem, he would stand up in the living room and put his hand over his heart. Such a patriot to Cuba, patriot to the United States. And I gave him a 90th birthday party with all friends, salsa. And he said, listen, let's forget about the food, just bring the music and let's just dance with your friends. So my friends would form a long line to dance with him.
I love it. It's your chapter 9, Life is for Dancing, that your dad loved dancing more than anything. His theme was what? Life is a party made for dancing. That was his line, was it?
It is.
Yeah. What would you say was the biggest lesson you took from your dad?
My biggest lesson I took from him is that the glass is always half full, not half empty. I mean, he would look at just even just the loss that he went through. He never saw his parents again. He wanted to be buried in his country, and he could not be buried in his country. I mean, those gut-wrenching losses. And yet he was so positive. He would always say, but look at what we have. Look at what we have. My dad tipped the ladies at the grocery store that are working at the cash register. Like, he never left the grocery store without giving these ladies a tip. I'm like, Dad, that is so nice of you. So everything was thankfulness, gratefulness. There was never anything negative that he held back, even though he was very upset about Castro and communism. And, when you get him in that subject, you can go on and on. But the glass is always half full, because if you look at what you have, instead of what you don't have, then your life changes. The filters in your whole life change. And that's really what he was about.
And that is such a juxtaposition, for example, to my father, who also, had to leave communism, but never really embraced where he landed, and actually made everything responsible for what wouldn't work. So he looked always at the glass half empty, not full. And life was not for dancing, life was for suffering. So that was one of those lessons that my father gave me. You make sure you're prepared. There's going to be a lot of crap you will have to shovel. And it is true, there's a lot of hard times, and pain makes us grow. And he opened my eyes to that for sure, but not in this kind of enthusiastic, positive way that, hey, you will always figure it out. And at the end of it, you're going to have a great salsa dance. That seems to be the vibe from your dad. Okay.
Yes. What is so funny is that I have an uncle who was exactly like what you're saying, always negative. Like, they took everything away from me. I was never able to make the money again. This is what happened. And I would always compare him to my dad. I'm like, you got to be kidding. This is night and day. Dad was just thankful that the present time is what it is, and we were able to get out. And yeah, he gave me my positive attitude. And, and again, he's a legacy in our family. Every single person that reminds, we're sitting around and saying something about my dad, and big smiles come up.
I love this. I love it. But back to you now, because what I think some of the other defining moments, I thought, and correct me if I got it wrong from what I read in between the lines, was American Friends, one in particular, that, opened you up to that world. You kind of embraced it anyway, trying to watch American soap operas, which your parents did not appreciate. My parents had me watch German soap operas, so we would understand the culture. We had to speak German at home. I was raised bilingual, fair enough, but they really wanted to be proactive immigrants and integrate. And then the other thing is moving away for college. That I thought was very interesting. Tell me how you were so adamant about, yes, we live in 3 generations in a family, fair enough, but I'm moving for university.
And it was, it got kind of crazy, obviously, because I mean, how do you get through all that? Even like my grandmother saying, your skirt's too short, you can't go to school this way. So back to the friend, Tessie was my best friend there. And in fact, she still is. And it's very important to meet her. And her family was so accepting and loving. Again, 10 children, Irish. And it was the first time that my mom actually also trusted a family. Like, I could never do sleepovers. It was like very scary for my mom to let me go sleep at a friend's house. And Tessie's family was the first time she allowed me to have a sleepover. I was probably like in 11th grade in high school or something when I could do it. So they, she became part of our family. She would go on vacations with us, and her family accepted me as one of their kids too. It was so healing and such a beautiful blessing to me. And so when college came around, one of the things was this, like, extended families have no boundaries. And, that's where the grandparents are telling you this and the grandfathers. And I thought, I got to get out. I got to get out. And my mother was always fearful. Like, she could never even think of me going to a school in the Northeast, or I had to be close enough where I could drive back home. And she wanted me to go to school in the city, because when you're in Cuba, you don't ever leave. I mean, she did go to Havana, which was 2 hours away, but family like gets married sometimes and moves back in with their family, So it was very difficult. And I got to tell you, it was very important to me because I feel like I broke away, and that was part of my leadership characteristic. My brother, on the other hand, stayed and lived at home and went to college in the town. My mother was so happy he did that. And I would always tell him, you got to break away. You got to break away. He's got a different personality than I do. And so I had to go start over at LSU, it was about 2 hours away from New Orleans, but it was hard. It was hard on her. She was really miserable about the whole thing. But for me, I had to find my way, find my friends, find my, what I was going to study. And it was very difficult still. It was not easy. But the hardest thing about breaking away from my mom was actually when I decided that I was going to leave New Orleans. I got married. And then my ex-husband, we decided to leave New Orleans and move to Dallas. That was so horrible for her. The fact that I was not going to be living in the same town with her after we came from Cuba, and all the family, the sacrifices we've been through and everything else, for you to leave and go to another city, which is the opposite of Americans, right? I mean, that's the other thing I was trying to understand. Like, how can American culture, like the minute you finish high school, it's like, get out of here, go find a job, go live somewhere else. My family was like, don't ever leave, don't ever leave. And so I had to break away, and it was hard because I felt like I was letting my mother down, more my mother than my father. It was interesting. My dad was like, go. And that was good. Go with the wind. Although he missed me a lot, my mother was very controlling. So it was hard. It was hard.
No, I can imagine. And I'm glad you brought up relationships, because I wonder what this kind of, a trajectory in your life as a child, and then also this finding refuge and that really closeness and that sanctuary, that cocoon in your family, and then breaking out of it, where I can imagine everybody feeling betrayed, or your mom feeling betrayed, saying, hey, we've always been the sanctuary. How can you now break away? What are you going to do there? You're going to come back eventually, so you may as well stay here. I mean, this is the kind of vibe I'm getting. How your ex-husband, because I'm just thinking that self-sufficiency, you always had to be self-sufficient. You had to look after yourself. You had to be strong. You had to go through your stuff. You didn't really you had love, but maybe not the guidance you might have needed or wanted in the American sense that fit with the American culture. To what extent did that actually express itself in building a relationship with a man, being such a strong individual, having had to be always strong?
Difficult. It was very difficult, because then the part about fitting in comes in too, right? Like, you want to be American and you're fitting in and you're strong. And I got to tell you, that's the chapter that I took out of the book.
Yeah, put it back in.
One day I'll put back in, because that is actually a whole book. That is a whole book. Looking back, I was looking at different traits than I should have been looking for. He came from a very nuclear family. They didn't even see their extended family. They're very kind of cold people, that very little warmth. And, one of the things that I didn't realize is that, yeah, I was the breadwinner. I was the one reaching out. So my career went from like boom, right? And he saw it as, oh, I don't have to work. I don't have to work as hard. She's doing all the work. And so, he was a lawyer, but he wasn't working really that much harder. And he was like doing part-time, this, that. And so I didn't even care about that, because I was thinking, oh, I got to support my family. I had that same mentality. I'm the one that's got to work harder than anybody else in this family to support everybody. So I was supporting him and the kids and everything else, traveling like crazy. One time I had 2 suitcases, one that was packed and one that was unpacked. I'd pull this one and continue. And, and he would be with the kids, but I also had someone helping me with the kids. It was like, I did not understand that part of me that actually needed more of a nurturing relationship, that needed someone to actually love me more unconditionally, because it was actually almost a conditional love. I mean, one thing I'll tell you, and again, this is a whole nother book, his parents, he once told me, he goes, my parents, I lived in Chicago, my parents do not like Hispanics. And they're not real happy about me marrying a Hispanic. So I went into this marriage with just like, oh my gosh. And later, what's so interesting is that as my career went up, all of a sudden, I became the favored daughter-in-law. Like, oh my goodness. And he goes, my parents now think you're the favorite because you're doing so well in your career and everything else. So there were all these conditions put on it. And I think I still was not healed from like living in the two worlds. That was the hardest part of living in the two worlds, was when I was married, because I was actually trying to be 2 people. I didn't tell a lot of people that I was Hispanic because I didn't need to. I mean, I was like, I had different last name. And after I got divorced, I took my name back. But I was like, really kind of mixed. It's taken a lot of healing to be where I am today.
Mm. It resonates so much with me, because I also have friends who had a tough time as a kid, and they were very self-sufficient, successful women, quite testosterone driven, simply because they always had to be, let's put it this way. And they had always difficulty attracting strong men. Lovely men, good men, even wealthy men, nothing to do with that, but men with backbone, they would feel actually protected by. And, I had a couple of times also Dr. John Gray on the show. Women are from Mars and women are from Mars and men are from Venus.
Right.
Exactly. You remember that one.
Right.
And really, that when you are a very strong woman, one tends to attract those men that look for that strength, but you end up being the man in the relationship. To some extent, I had to go through some sort of healing as well, because I was always, okay, my dad said, you don't need to depend on anybody. If you depend on somebody, you're lost. So always be self-sufficient. So of course, you project that also onto your partnerships. So my relationships, I was always with great men, but was I with an alpha man? No. I had to learn to be more feminine and to look out, hey, for guidance, can you help me? And learn that femininity, bring it back to me to then attract my current husband, who is an absolute alpha man. Okay, but I had to learn to be a woman to attract that. And it's extremely taken away from you if, as a child, you're not being looked after, but you're looking after everybody.
Yeah.
Can you relate to that?
I can so relate to that. No, absolutely. I mean, and it took me a long time, and I'm remarried also to someone who is alpha, and yet extremely unconditional love, like just amazing, so different, so emotionally connected to me. And I almost think during the time I was married, the first time, I was not emotionally connected to it. It was almost like I had to go through these transactions. I had to get through this. I had 3 kids to raise. I had to do a job. I had to take care of my parents. I had to keep doing what I was doing as a child. I mean, I kept living that person. And taking care of myself was like maybe having, my girlfriends or, whatever, I'd go to shopping a lot, didn't shop a lot. So I didn't know how to take care of, it's like going back and taking care of that little girl and healing her so that once she's healed, she can have a relationship with a man that is much more, productive, and it's much more healing and healthy. And healthy is a big word. And yeah, I mean, I got to tell you, that relationship was so difficult. I mean, to the point where, our divorce took 2.5 years, and it was just like super, super, there's a whole stories that I can write about that. And one of the things that he would do is that he really counted on my money, on my earnings, which was, to me in the beginning, it didn't matter because we were all married and, living under one roof. And I was so giving that my paycheck was going into this joint checking account that I wasn't even looking at because I was too busy. I was too busy earning a living, taking care of my kids, taking care of my family, being the good person that I am. And there were some things going on that were not right, right? Did I know about it? No. And shame on me, but there's a lot of women out there that do the same, right? It was just like, oh my goodness. And when you wake up from all that, then you go through more trauma.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was traumatic. I lost like 20 pounds. And I was the one who filed for divorce. So it was like me. But at the same time, I had to rebuild the kids and go through all that. I mean, it was traumatic with a capital T.
Yeah, no, I can imagine, especially when, I mean, I wrote down a list how you described yourself in the reading of the book. I am, dedication, presence, resilience, a breadwinner, single mom, caregiver. That's who I am. It's like, okay, all right, I get it. I think this is exactly what we talked about, and you touched on it a couple of times, and that's the theme of sacrificing for your family, sacrificing for your job, but most importantly, you're sacrificing a lot from what you would want to do or what you are really about for the greater benefit. What I was, what I thought intriguing was that you experienced a lot of sacrifice from your family to make sure that your family is okay. But when you started having a great career and you were involved and asked to look after a hostage situation in Costa Rica, I love that story because here it was interesting to see that you as the breadwinner went and sacrificed family life and looking after those kids, spending months on end away at a time when that wasn't so common to do. And in a culture, more the Latino culture was an absolute, what are you on about? How did that?
That was, I mean, I look back at that. I'm like, how did that even happen? So I started working at a company called Perot Systems. And it was interesting. It was at the time when Ross Perot was running for president. And I came in with a different group of people that were now running the company because he was running for president. And when he did not get the presidency and came back to the company, all the people that were running the company, he said, out of here. Well, I was part of that group. I'd come in with the new, but he wanted to he said, no, you stay. And he got to know me. And one of the things that Ross Perot did is he had a company that he helped people from all over the world. So in the middle of the night, someone was needing his help in the Philippines or wherever. He had a group of people would fly out and help these people. He was just amazing. And he didn't want anybody to know it. All of it was anonymous. He got a letter one night from a family that was missing their son. And it was a remote kidnapping from a parent that was an ex-grandfather in Costa Rica. And he said, you speak Spanish, would you go and find out what's going on? And I thought, this is so strange. First of all, I don't normally use my Spanish in my job. And so here's Mr. Perot asking me if I speak Spanish. And I thought, well, maybe I'll go for the day. And so I did go for the day to see what was going on and talk to the lawyers and this and that. When I got back to see him, I said, here's what's going on. This child's in a compound and it's going to take a couple of months for someone to get him out. And he goes, Marie, would you go? And I struggled over that. I'm like, I have to leave my family. my husband, I called my parents, and then it was like my faith. It was like something outside of me said, you're on a journey and it's not necessarily yours. And this is something that's opened up for you. And for some reason, you're going to need to step in. And I go back to that little white dress day and other things that have happened to me in my life. And I always think, why has this been put in my path? There's a reason. And if I don't step in through the door, then that could be ramifications to that too, because I'm being asked to do this. So I had some help at home and everything else. And I said I would do it. And I went, my parents were like, what? And then the whole story is about me being in Costa Rica and learning. All of a sudden, I feel like I'm maybe in Cuba, returning to my roots and finding the kidnapped child. And it was amazing. It was an amazing moment. Like, my kids would come visit me. We did have that. And by the way, I became very close friends with Mr. Perot. It was really interesting. I had one phone that was mine and one phone that was his. He would call me in the middle of the day and night. He's amazing. And he passed away about 1.5 years ago. So, but it was a moment in time where I got to experience something that I'll never experience again. And, later on, we had the ambassador of the United States call my house, and it was this whole international treaty for kidnapped children that Costa Rica had not signed. And because of the work that Mr. Perot had done and with us there and everything else, they started the paperwork to sign that international treaty. And so that was an amazing moment. And, to this day, I don't regret it. My kids were always like, they miss me. They talked to me on the phone. They knew what I was doing. I also will tell you, I kind of had to get away from my husband. It's a very weird thing to be saying to you because I don't think I've said it before. And I certainly haven't said it in the book. But I just needed a break to maybe it was a healing time that I just needed to step away from that was going on in my life and sort of take, look at what's going on with me. That part of it, I realized later, I didn't do it for that reason. But I think it helped me to kind of look at some behavior that was not right and to kind of figure out what I wanted to do. So sometimes we have to kind of look at things differently and know that these things come to you. You don't even know why it's coming to you, right? Was it about the kidnapped child, or was it about something that I had to go through to find myself? And I think that's more of the reason. It was about me finding myself and having to go through what I went through. And that has to be part of the journey.
And coming back then from Costa Rica, having resolved everything, did that then lead to your decision to get divorced?
It started thinking, it was kind of like the seeds. And, and I'll tell you, I said one day I'm going to talk about it in a podcast. So I'm going to talk to you about it. Why I get divorced? Well, I got divorced because I found out that he was having an affair with his secretary, who, by the way, was 15 years older than me, older. And they were having an affair, and I found out, and I couldn't believe it. Because I had sacrificed, given my life, did all these things that I thought was like the perfect wife. And yet, as I look back after, years of counseling, I think he felt threatened, that I was, whatever, my career was taking off. He could have had a good career too, but, so once I found out, by the way, once I found out this was going on and I knew it was the secretary of 15 years, I'm like, this is it. There's no way moving forward could ever happen. And I filed for the divorce. But I had already been to Costa Rica. I had already put those seeds in place. And it was a huge part of my healing to move forward and to get my name back. It was really important. Quintana, my dad's name, I wanted it back. And so, I immediately went to the Social Security office.
And changed it back to who you were. I love that, because as you were saying, you know, my first thing, and that is what I again think is so admirable in what I read about you. You embrace whatever comes. There's a reason why I'm here, which is an extremely spiritual way of seeing things. Okay, obviously this landed on my desk. For me to do something with it, sometimes it is destructive, but most of the time it really is, hey, that is an obstacle, you will grow through it, or you will be able to help to resolve something. That then the collateral impact benefit could be that you get distance, a more distant objectivity from another issue, a private issue is, I guess, turns out beneficial. And my God, and I mean, how cliche. The affair in general, that she was older just shows that he, I think, if I am not a psychologist at all, I mean, this is more your turf, is he needed somebody even more to look after him.
He did.
On one
He
hand,
did.
it was revenge, but you know, somebody 15 years older than you as a man, that is really okay. You were already looking after him financially. He was taking a little bit of a backseat, had a girlfriend, yeah, and now, oh, even better. And I have somebody that might be even more mature.
Right. No. Everyone would say, they would look at me and look at her and they're like, you're the mistress, she's the wife.
Wow. No, but such strength again. And you know, and if I may touch on Danny, because I just thought, really, is there no break for Mary in this world? I mean, you're fantastic. You will live to 150 years. It's like, you know, your resilience and the strength that comes out of it. Dan, you have 3 children. You had 3 children. Tell us a little bit about Danny, and also what, I can't ask any mother, what did that do to you? One of your children passing.
Yes.
But what did it do to the entire family dynamic and also your outlook on life? Because
yes, absolutely. So, you know, he was my first child, and Danny had some learning differences growing up. And so he was the one that I needed to spend the most time with. He was 5 years older than my, you know, other twins. Loving, caring, you know, always looking out for others. But, you know, the kids would pick on him at school. So we would go through this whole thing where he had to go to special schools, and he had a little bit of Asperger. You know, I have spent a lot of time, even with my career, I always were able to take time off during the day to make sure that Danny was fine and things like that. So fast forward through all that, Danny, as he approached college, he started to have more of psychological issues where he'd be manic and have a lot of, you know, issues with that. And so he, there was a special home that he went to, and I went to like 15 doctors. Like whenever there was a new doctor, a new medicine, I was always chasing that down. He was very good about taking his medicine, but at times he wasn't. And I mean, you have no idea. As an executive, I can remember times getting on the corporate plane, finding out that Danny had an issue. The plane shuts. I'm flying to New York for a meeting. I land in New York. I'm talking to the doctor outside of, you know, the airport. I go into a meeting. I mean, it's like balancing all of that out was so hard. I mean, when you really have a very high power career and one of your children has a problem, it's very difficult. So every now and then, Danny would have to go into the hospital to get his medication corrected. And when we went through the divorce, it really shocked him. And, you know, even though we spoke to doctors and everything else about how to take care of him, I think that was just really difficult for him. And he was hospitalized for periods of time, and then he would come out. But still, he was great. I mean, he was assisting the football coach. He loved the football coach, was his mentor. So he would assist them with, you know, the games, and he was the hero. We have a beautiful award for him as a servant leader award at his school. In fact, I just went to it a few weeks ago to give it to a young man, because he was always taking care of people. He was always taking care of others, loved family. Anytime anyone in the family was sick, he would take people's prayers, and he had a pillow under his bed. I said, Danny, what is that pillow doing on your bed? Mom, it's my praying pillow. He would take out his praying pillow. He would pray on his knees about anyone's health issues in the family. So he was just amazing. And so what happened with Danny was that as I was going to be remarried, I had a wedding day and planned in Florida. So we were all going to go to Florida for the wedding. My mom lives in Florida. My family was in Florida. And a few days before the wedding, Danny he was not right. You could tell he was manic. He was not right. And, I made the decision that he can't go to the wedding, and he really couldn't, because those situations usually lead to hospitalization. So I said, we're going to have to, and I'm going to have a party here. This is going to be a small service. And he was fine with it. He stayed with his dad. And so he stayed back. I go to Florida, and within the week, he goes into the hospital to do the recheck of his medicine, which is something that usually happens. And so we had the wedding on Saturday, the 14th of October. And then on Monday, I flew back from Florida. I hadn't heard. I'd called the hospital. I was not in touch with him. Usually it's hard to talk to. They won't let you talk to them. You could talk to the nurse. And I flew in on Monday. Tuesday morning at 2:00 in the morning on the 17th, I got a call from my ex-husband telling me that Danny had passed away. Mm-hmm. And what had happened was he went into that hospital. They did not look at his electronic medical records to see what medicine he was on. Took him off of a medicine and induced this catatonic. He had a reaction to the medicine they had given him. They took him into the emergency room, and they should have brought him into the ICU, but they didn't. They put him back into the mental health clinic, and he passed away of a pulmonary embolism.
So unnecessary. That is
so
negligent.
Just negligent. And just to begin, how do you walk through that? I mean, it was like you look at God and you're like, this is no way can I can't even deal with this. I mean, there's so much emotion. This is a whole nother book again, because I thought, first of all, my mother could not travel here for the wedding. That's why I had it there. So what happens is I have a wedding on a Saturday and a funeral on the following Saturday. And all my family from the wedding comes back to be with me that week. And the loss of Danny was just, it was just so deep. I can't tell you. I mean, and I was married, and I was married to my husband. So my husband was there to care for me. His first job as a husband was to hold me, because I could not move. I mean, one of my kids stayed back 3 months to help me. My daughter, because they're twins, 4-year-old twins, took 2 months off. One of them took 3 months off. And for 6 months, I just, had trouble going to the grocery store. Just like, what is this? And, somehow with all that journey, there was this grace that kept calling for me. I made these praying pillows. Like, there's a long story. I saw these leaves come. He and I used to pick leaves. I saw these leaves on my pool. I took pictures of them. I made praying pillows to give to everyone. I found Danny with me. Like, I found times when I thought, you're with me. This is why this happened, because you love it. I found this amazing book that has actually been really important to me. It's called The Lord is My Shepherd. But in the book, it talks about losing a son or daughter, and then knowing that your role is to live their unlived years. That, to me, woke me up. That said, I have a calling now, that I'm going to live Danny's unlived years. And I remember, like, during that time, like 4 months after he passed away, Danny loved Lady Gaga. And she comes into town, and this friend of mine says, let's go to the Lady Gaga concert. I said, I can't even get my clothes on. I'm so sad. And then all of a sudden I thought, this is the first moment. It was a defining moment. But Danny loved Lady Gaga. I went and bought a Lady Gaga wig. And I dressed like Lady Gaga.
I love that. I love that.
And I went to that Lady Gaga concert and I literally cried during that whole concert because I thought, this is the first time I'm having joy. And I'm like, he's with me and I'm living something that I'm doing for him. And I took that and moved forward with it. And there have been so many things that I've done with him and for him that, you know, he's still with me. I mean, so many things. I mean, my whole role at Tenet, which is a whole nother story, but having found an amazing role and job that executive role 6 months after Danny passed away, which was amazing, only to work with someone, the CEO who had lost his son a year before Danny. And he and I would stay till 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, talking about our sons. Unbelievable.
It is
So many grace.
Yeah. You know, what strikes me about what you were just saying, so living the unlived years, because if you embrace that, that is, I don't want to say a way to accept or forgive that your child was taken from you. This is what I would take as I might see it as a mother having lost a child, and I cannot imagine losing Victoria ever. I'd like, if I lost her, I have no other children. I say, okay, there's no point for me staying, literally.
Yeah.
You know, I live for her, I live through her now. But being able to then embrace that as a concept, as a mindset, you understand and you see the world then a lot more through their eyes. So you would see the leaves on the pool. You would do the pillows, the praying pillows. You would actually pick up on the idea, hey, maybe Danny would have gone, or I would have taken him if he had still been here, and he loved that, and you feel close to him because you know that was something that his heart was beating for, and now it's beating through you for Lady Gaga or whatever that is. I think this is a really, really strong and powerful mindset and emotional predisposition, I'd say, to somehow try to deal with the loss of a child. I love that.
It's so huge. And Patricia, when I was an executive at Tenet, not only was the CEO had lost his son, but you're not going to believe this, I had 2 assistants during that period of time. And during the time, they each lost a son. No, it was horrible. One of them had a motorcycle accident and the other one overdosed. And they're coming to me. And I use this book and what I had learned for them. And I was just going through it. And I thought, how is this happening? This cannot be happening. And I look back and I'm thinking the reason I was there, I think, was to be there to help them.
Yeah, not a role you would like to pick for yourself, especially having to go
Right.
through your own loss. But yeah, but on the other hand, you were pivotal for them to be there. I'm so sure to be able to give that strength from
Right.
somebody who's been there or who is there. You never unlose your
Right.
child. That's
Right.
you know,
Right.
that's constant now.
Right.
Mary, there is one more thing before we get to the 3 lessons which you drew in this book, which I loved, and that is what I felt was you coming to terms with it's okay to come from Cuba. You know, because since day one, there was this, you know, this juxtaposition or this tension between rejecting everything that was Cuban and embracing everything that was American. And then, so it happened, you finally, for the first time, visited Cuba and you felt at home.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about what that did to you when you then came back to the US and saw the same things, maybe in the same light, maybe in a different light. You know, did you finally merge those 2 worlds in you?
Mm-hmm. It was such a blessing. It was such a blessing to go back with my mom. And I think to see it through her eyes. And so to go back to the home where I was born, to the home where she grew up, to see her sit at the table with my grandfather, used to eat dinner, and everything was the same. You know, Cuba's like back in the 50s. Nothing's been touched. The infrastructure hasn't been updated. And so to see the aunts that, you know, and I went through this thing when I was younger, like, why are you writing all these letters to these Cuban people that I don't even know? Like my grandfather would sit at the typewriter typing letters. And all of a sudden I was meeting them. and I was meeting them and seeing where they lived and seeing how much love they have for us. I mean, I think that's the one thing that just really came out is like they have so little, and yet family, they didn't forget us. Like they're still thinking of us, and every letter we sent to them is there. Like they treasure the letters. They treasure the pictures that we would send to them. And then I meet this aunt who had my baby book, and a little piece of my hair was in it, and my baby cup. And I'm like, she goes, I've kept this for 50 years in hopes that I would see you again. I'm thinking, who does that out of such love? It touched me in so many ways. It brought everything back. I think that I was trying to push away, that I was trying to not like really internalize it because I felt like it wasn't me. And then I realized it's so me. Like they have my baby book. Like that's so big. Like my baby book is so important to me. I thought I'd never see it. I didn't even know I had one. And so, I mean, and then to see my mom, we went back to Havana. She went back to the Immaculate Conception, which was her high school. She knew exactly how to get there. And she kneels in front of the Virgin Mary statue and thanks the Virgin Mary, because she's a prayer warrior every day, for helping us in everything, for helping us to be free, for helping her children, for this, that I was able to grant my mom that gift, that she could return to her school and go back to the chapel where she used to pray and to give thanks where she gave thanks when she was a child. It touched me in ways. I mean, it changed my life that I will never be able. I mean, what a gift that I was able to do that. And actually, when I was coming back from that trip, my cousin, the priest that we went with, the bishop, he said, you should start thinking about your book now. That was another defining moment about the book. But, I came back with such respect and understanding and respect for like the people there that have no food, and, I have a cousin who's a cardiologist and makes, $15 a month and sells peanuts at the beach and tries to drive a taxi cab on the side. And it's like, they're living this life that could have been me. Like out of my father's courage and, the risk that he took and the sadness and the grieving was to give me a life that they don't have, but that could have been me. And so there were so many mixed emotions and such gratefulness. And again, the thought was, I've got to write about this. And so all these moments came, and I was thinking all this time, I got to put this in a book because I have to share this with other people.
And you did. And I can only, and I will continue to recommend reading your book. What you were just saying is really interesting about, seeing your aunt keeping the most intimate, most beautiful information and pieces like the baby book for 50 years for you, because they were actually living with you for the last 50 years. You, on the other hand, had a life trying to forget about wherever you came from. Did you somehow feel guilty about that rejection, that strong rejection, trying to embrace so desperately the new in some shape or form? Did you feel a bit of...
I think there's an underlying guilt of some sort there. But you know what? I think my parents healed a lot of that because I sort of focused the energy on them and helping them and knowing that they were doing it for the right reasons. And they've helped other family members get out since. So I think there was some guilt there, but the most important part was that my parents together made the decision as a couple, and it was a better life for them too. And they would have really struggled if they had stayed back. So I think as a family, we were able to stay together. As my mom would always say, we're a family. We're going to stay together. We're a family. And I think doing it as a family was so important to us.
Who would Mary be if you had stayed, you think? Do you ever wonder?
Oh, I do. I wonder because I actually saw, like cousins getting married and people marrying. I was looking around going, would I have married some of these people?
I love that. And
I don't,
yeah,
I mean, it would have been, I have a cousin who actually had two degrees and went to school because, of course, school was free. They can have, and, she works for a large company, international company that's in Cuba, but she can only make $15 a month. And then her person who's the same level makes, let's say, 200,000, but the government gets her portion of it. And so I thought to myself, that is so unfair. I don't know how I'm been able to the unfairness. That's one thing I have struggled with in my life is the fairness of things. Like, this is so unfair. And I've had to kind of swallow unfairness at times. And I'm much better at it. I'm much better at it. I have to say, I've worked at one of my working things that I do for myself because it's unfair that they stayed. I left. And yet, we try to make the best of it.
I think that is something that my parents outright said to me, which I felt a huge responsibility, because what they always said, well, we left communism for you. You are growing up in the West in freedom. You have the opportunity to make something out of yourself. We wouldn't have had the chance. Both of them had university degrees, coming from extremely good families, pre-communism, having been taken everything, and then they basically fled. And on one hand, it was very empowering because they always trusted that I could do it. On the other hand, I always had this responsibility on me. I have to make it.
Right.
I have to then not only make it big, but give back. And I always did. I always looked after my parents also financially. It is.
It is. It's the yin and the yang. I go through it. I still take care of her financially. Yes.
Yeah. But you do it, and even though you have repaid a million times already, but you always do it because, again, I don't know where I would be if we would have stayed, over there.
Yes.
What schooling, what opportunity, what husband, what child? Obviously not the one I have, which I'm very happy with, I have to say. But still, oh, Mary, okay, let's start. We've been already well over your time, so thank you for being still with me.
Absolutely.
The 3 big lessons, and I loved how you managed to really kind of filter it down. And I think this is really how you are as a leader in a corporate, environment. You have to go elevator. Okay, so you just boil it down.
That's right.
3 lessons. Trust. You can start over is the first one. Embrace your authentic self is the second one. And third, live your legacy now. Give us a little bit more meat on all 3 of the lessons and why you picked those.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. And I have to say, I worked on those 3 lessons to say, what could those 3 lessons be for a long time? And really worked at ensuring that the book also translated that. And starting over for me isn't just about like coming from another country and going through the whole immigration. And that's a huge piece of it because I wouldn't be who I am. But starting over in a job that, let's say you're being laid off and you're scared to take that next role. And I've had employees that have come to me for help with that, saying that you're all of a sudden your job is moving and you don't want to take it. You have to go out and look for someone. Or that you're retired and you have to start over a new life. And then what about starting over a relationship? You're in a bad relationship and you're scared to move. You're scared to get out of it. And so many women they're just like, well, it's happened. I'm just going to stay married to this person. The fact that someone's passed away and you're having to start over after, and what I had to go through just to start over again with divorce so I think it takes such strength and courage, and it takes faith, and it takes knowing who you are. It's like you can't start over in the right place unless you know yourself internally. And that's really why I got to the second one, which is live an authentic life, because it's like, who am I? Like, I went through this whole thing where I didn't know who I was. Am I the Cuban? Am I American? I'm going to have this American name. I'm married an American guy. That's who I am. I don't want these people to know I'm Hispanic. And then I go to Cuba, and it's like, oh, wow, that took a lot of energy, took a lot of emotional energy out of me. I just want to live my life authentically. Here's who I am. You know, I'm not here to be everybody's friend. I'm not here to please everybody, but I can breathe and I can live free. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of people, I mean, living authentic, your authentic self. I've talked to people, for example, from the LGBTQ community, that they've had to not say who they really are for many years and hide their identity because a very good friend of mine, he didn't want his father to know that he was gay. You know, he couldn't live an authentic life. And I think we as human beings want to be treated for who we are. And we want that little girl inside, that little boy inside to come out and say, here's who I am. All these years have sort of come on top of me and made me somebody I'm not, but I only did that to survive. And that's the other thing. I didn't mean to do that, but I had to do that. I had to not be authentic just to survive what I was going through. And to live your legacy now, I've done a lot of speeches on that. And I'll tell you, we have to live in the present, and more after Danny passed away than any time, to say, you know, this vacation I just took, I can remember taking a vacation with Danny in this place that I just went in Florida. And I thought, wow, did I ever think there was going to be a moment that he wasn't with me on a vacation? Like when I was on that vacation, that was probably one of the last vacations I went on with him. So you have to know that your legacy starts with every decision you make. Every decision you make, whether it's to do whatever thing you're going to do each day, and that is building who you are, and it's building your legacy for yourself, for your children, for those to come. And I think it's so powerful to just live in the present. I try to do that as much as I can. Obviously, sometimes you can't, and it's not like you can get down on things, but really holding on to those truths, I think, has been so important throughout my entire life.
I find the third point, all 3 points are really, really powerful. But I thought, you know, live your legacy is so powerful because it really brings home that, you know, be mindful and be in the moment. People are going, yeah, of course I am, but you're not. You know, we do,
right.
You know, we do go through our habitual rituals, processes, which we need to do. That's our daily structure. But then if you are in the moment without a podcast, without a screen or whatever, and you actually prepare that food or really say, hey, I'm here by the beach with Danny, my son, you know, and we're having such a great day together. And you actually even just make that kind of mental note or just say it, hey, I really love this here. Isn't that cool? Right. You know, sometime we're going to laugh about this or remember this. That's all it takes. That is all that takes. Yeah, I mean, there's little tools that you know that you. What do you mean mindful? What do you mean mindful? There are little tools you can actually pull that mindfulness out, and it is a tool that is not appreciated necessarily in the way we have to run our lives. Literally run our lives. And when you run, you don't see so many things, you know. So yeah, and as you say, every decision is pivotal, even though you do not know right now that tomorrow it will turn out to be pivotal. As you were saying, your decision to say, I don't know whether you had actually a choice to go to Costa Rica to help out, but that is a decision you made. You made it knowing it's going to be hard on your kids, going to be hard on, you know, whoever may be judging you for it. You know, how can you leave your kids for what, a month, a couple of months of being there, having them to visit you? I mean, what, you know, who would ever do that for what, a hostage? You know, do you know what I mean? What are they to you? You have your family who needs you. Turns out to be one of the most pivotal things for you in many ways, apart from the experience itself. Your children becoming maybe also more, okay, we can do it also without mom, yeah, you know, in a way. And then taking a pivotal step on your private relationship, finding certain things out. So you did not know how significant on more and more levels that could be. And recognizing this, that whatever we do is like these little pearls of decisions that make up, you know, the necklace, which we call then our life or life legacy. Beautiful, powerful. Mary, incredible. I want a sequel. I'm sorry. I want a sequel of this one. I've already had a preview for myself and everybody who's involved in this, which is very interesting. Last flight from Havana. Mary, this is amazing book, amazing story. And I can so feel for all the other people that reach out to you saying, hey, I read this, you wrote what I went through, what my parents kind of went through, didn't need to be from Cuba. It's just the entire concept of, leaving one world, being dropped in another, being an outcast most of the time, needing to get on with your life, find yourself, become yourself, sacrifice yourself, and then re-become yourself. I mean, there's so many developments. Thank you. Thank you for
It
putting
has been magical to talk to you. It really has. I have so enjoyed it. And I thank you to your viewers and thank you to you. I have really, what a blessing this morning to be able to do this. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, my dear On the Pulse community. Please, if you loved this conversation with Mary Quintana as much as I did, give us a like, subscribe as you do, share with your friends, and most importantly, try to get hold of this book. I think if you're a refugee or not, it doesn't really matter, but it really moves so many emotional, but also intellectual levels within you. And maybe you look at families that are not necessarily from your culture, from your background, in a more empathetic and loving way and embracing way, if nothing else. So thank you for having been with us, and I see you on the next show. See you soon.
Together,
Bye.
we go out there together. We begin to share together. We find our way together.